Just hours away from expiring, President Trump just extended the ceasefire moments ago, but none of the key players have even departed for peace talks in Pakistan. Where do we go from here? The nominee for Fed chair faces blistering questions from Congress about whether he will stand up to President Trump. Apple CEO steps down. What's the future for the tech giant and their ability to innovate? Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in for Major Garrett, and welcome to the Takeout. We start with a significant development from the president. After days of mixed messages about the ceasefire, some statements had it expiring tomorrow, others in just a few hours. President Trump has released a statement with no ambiguity. He's extending the ceasefire until a proposal from Iran is submitted and peace discussions are concluded, meaning they are open-ended. Earlier in the day, President Trump was asked if attacks would resume. He had said that he expects to, quote, be bombing because that is a better attitude to go in with, adding the military is raring to go. The rhetoric had been building just as it did 2 weeks ago when diplomacy brought us back from President Trump's threat of killing a civilization. Once again, with this deadline nearing, the president has dialed back. We go to the White House now with CBS's Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, what more do we know on the ceasefire extension?
Nicole, he let the world know only just under an hour ago that the ceasefire, in essence, is now open-ended as they wait for some kind of unified response from what he describes as a fractured and disorganized leadership of Iran, saying that this request to extend the ceasefire comes from the Pakistanis. This follows a full day of closed-door meetings. He's just beginning an event with NCAA champion athletes of all sorts of sports where he may make some reference to this, but otherwise we have not seen him all day, and it was known that he was meeting with the vice president, the secretary of state, and other top national security officials regarding the situation, and then this statement came. But it's another day, Nicole, of contradictory statements from the president on how exactly this war is going to proceed. This morning, in a pre-market interview with CNBC, he insists, I'm not extending the ceasefire. Just after the bell rang at 4 o'clock Eastern time, however, he then announces this open-ended ceasefire. So it's yet another day of confusion, not only for the world, but also for Americans here at home, trying to determine how much longer might this conflict continue.
Yeah, and to that end, have we heard anything from the Iranians or the Pakistanis, and any word whether Vice President Vance and the rest of the U.S. delegation will eventually head to Pakistan this week?
No word yet on whether U.S. officials are indeed going. As you pointed out, there was an expectation or possibility the vice president would leave earlier today with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner also en route. All three of them were in Washington today. We'll wait to hear about their whereabouts. Among other people weighing in today was the Iranian foreign minister calling out two developments. One, the continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The other, the American interdiction of a unflagged, sanctioned vessel in the Indian Ocean. The military went to great lengths to put out videos showing that the United States had interdicted this flight, or this vessel that was allegedly carrying sanctioned Iranian oil, as a signal of what it is the U.S. military is trying to do in that region to stop the flow of illicit oil from Iran. The foreign minister said both of those developments, the blockade and the interdiction, are two examples of the violation of the ceasefire and part of the reason why they weren't going to be showing up in Pakistan today. But again, then the president said the ceasefire will continue, and they're awaiting word from Iran on how they might want to proceed.
All right, CBS News' Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much from the White House. I want to turn now to CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. And Sam, what do you make of this ceasefire extension?
Well, it's certainly confusing to all of us, including myself, who's been in this field for 20 years. But let's be honest. These arbitrary deadlines were self-inflicted wounds for the president. They caused unnecessary anxiety, and it was like there was a ticking time bomb looming not just over the negotiators themselves, but over markets, over supply chains, and more. It is also unusual, Nicole, that these negotiations are playing out so publicly. In my experience, whether it's negotiating with the Iranians, the Taliban, or others, these negotiations do unfold behind closed doors because all parties don't want to box themselves in publicly. They want to retain the space to negotiate, to trade various carrots and sticks. If they do that publicly, they really put themselves in a corner and it's harder to get out. So this is an unusual moment. And this open-ended ceasefire will mean, we hope, that there'll be less kinetic or military conflict. But I just don't know that it's going to give markets, and particularly oil commodities traders, the stability they need to soften the blow of Operation Epic Fury and Operation Economic Fury.
I mean, in your view, who has the upper hand here?
I think the Iranians certainly feel empowered because they're aware how much of an Achilles heel rising oil and gas and other commodities prices are, particularly heading into the summer and heading into a November midterm election cycle. By the same token, we do know, for example, that earlier today, the Chinese government called on the Iranians and more generally called on parties to make the strait open. That's an interesting development because China is the largest buyer of Iranian energy supplies. So that signals to me that the Chinese are actively involved and the Iranians could feel pressure from them, too.
That being said, though, do you think the Iranian strategy is working?
I think the Iranian strategy of slowly trying to bleed American patience is working. What we don't know, and that's why what we're hearing publicly is such a small piece of what's actually happening, is what's on the table for the Iranians. The Iranians could open the Strait of Hormuz and days or weeks later launch a very cheaply made drone and disrupt traffic again. They need to get something that's going to enable them to feel like they don't have to disrupt maritime traffic anymore. That could come in the form of sanctions relief, asset unfreezing, or multiple other financial incentives.
At this point, how do you see things playing out?
I think that we have to be clear that even if J.D. Vance is not physically going to Islamabad today, negotiations are more than likely still happening behind closed doors. So our viewers should know that I would expect diplomatic engagement is ongoing via the Pakistanis to the Iranian regime and to the U.S. I would expect that to continue as they flesh out a deal. The Iran nuclear deal, the first one took 18 months, so that could take time. I would also expect that this military coalition of, I think, about 50 countries or 50 participants could start to move assets to the region sooner rather than later. They have said that they are not going to secure the Strait of Hormuz until the U.S. basically does a first sweep. If there's an indefinite ceasefire, they could feel like they have the stability they need to move assets. I would expect that to continue. But removing the blockade is going to be a last resort for the United States. That's Trump's trump card at the moment, so I would expect that to stay in place.
Given the president's back and forth on this here, do you think it's possible, he could just call this ceasefire off and just say, we're back to fighting again? I mean, how certain do you think this extension is in this moment?
I don't think anything is certain in this moment. I think that President Trump's public rhetoric has been a roller coaster, certainly, and that has caused a lot of unease, both in markets and around the world. And so I don't think the Iranians or the rest of the world are going to feel like this ceasefire extension is durable until there are real confidence-building measures by both sides. So perhaps the U.S. starts to remove certain pieces of the blockade, not the full thing, starts to talk about asset unfreezes or lifting sanctions, and the Iranians similarly start to show a sign of good faith. But I don't think anybody thinks this is real at this point for an indefinite period of time.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. We have a way to go. And it's going to be a bumpy road. It's not a linear path to denuclearizing a country and getting them to stop support for proxies.
All right. Sam Vinograd, thanks so much for being here at the table tonight. Florida Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick resigned from Congress today. Her announcement came right before a House Ethics Committee hearing to decide how she should be sanctioned for more than 24 campaign finance-related violations. Cherfilus-McCormick also faces federal charges for allegedly stealing nearly $5 million in COVID relief funds, but she has pleaded not guilty. Torian Small joins me now from Capitol Hill. And Torian, wow, this was a pretty big announcement here. What more are we learning about the Congresswoman's resignation?
Yeah, well, she says she's doing this to not distract from the work for her constituents in her district. She's doing this, as we know, this follows the resignations of Eric Swalwell and Tony Gonzalez. Those obviously for very different accusations against them. But this is a part of the process that we know to be the House Ethics Committee's investigations. This has historically been used as a tool to push out these members before it gets to the point that she was facing today, yesterday, which was those sanctions. We know that she could have been up for a recommendation from the panel for expulsion, to a censure, to fines and other potential penalties. But ultimately, though, she's avoiding that with this decision to resign effective immediately. That panel no longer has jurisdiction over her. And that's also what we heard members as they were leaving that panel that just didn't happen today. They said that while they are, quite miffed at the idea that they won't be able to hear from her attorney who was present about defense against sanctions, they ultimately, and this is coming from Mark DeSaulnier from California, he ultimately believed that she did the right thing by stepping down so that the rest of their work can continue. And I should say there still are calls for other members to be ousted, including Representative Corey Mills. Representative Nancy Mace, the Republican from South Carolina, has been angling to get him out. He in turn said that he would want to push her out for allegations against her, which is something that left Speaker Mike Johnson in a tizzy. He said, hold on, let's let this ethics investigation pan out before we head to that. So it's quite messy here on the Hill, Nicole, but we know that this doesn't necessarily stop here.
I want to turn to another big development on Capitol Hill today. The president's nominee to replace Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell was on the Hill today, Kevin Warsh. Let's take a listen to a bit of his testimony.
Let me be very clear. Monetary policy independence is essential. Monetary policy makers must act in the nation's interest. Their decisions the product of rigor, deliberation, and unclouded decision-making. I'm committed to ensuring that the conduct of monetary policy remains strictly independent.
And in terms of that last line there from Kevin Warsh, I mean, did he do enough to distance himself from the president here in terms of advocating for ensuring that the Federal Reserve would remain independent? What are lawmakers telling you, and what are his chances for confirmation at this point?
Yeah, Democrats aren't necessarily convinced. I think one of the more compelling back and forths we saw was from Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. He asked him point blank if the president promised him this job in return for cutting interest rates. There are a lot of qualifications behind it, which is something that even Democrats and Republicans on this panel recognize, the fact that he has this markets insider's perspective and serving on the federal board of governors from 2006 to 2011. But I think the most appealing aspect to the president about him is the fact that he has been critical about the inflationary policies of the Fed. And he's also said that he agrees with the president on cutting interest rates. We know that several Republicans say that they're still standing behind this pick, but Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina said that he would be opposing any pick, despite the fact that he actually likes Warsh, because of the DOJ investigation into the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Whether or not he would be enough to sway the opinion of a few other defectors needed to block this confirmation is yet to be seen. But I'll have to point out, Nicole, just recently we heard from Senator John Kennedy, who said that he hopes that the president has conversations with Tillis to give him guarantees about the state of that investigation in order to sway him to vote for Wash moving forward.
All right, Torian Small on Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you so much. Still to come here on the Takeout, a critical vote in Virginia, where voters are deciding whether to greenlight new congressional maps that would very likely favor Democrats. Also, Democrats have scored some victories in recent special elections, but will that momentum carry into the midterms? Democrat Hector Mojica is hoping he can flip a Florida congressional seat. He'll join me live. Plus, the Tim Cook era at Apple will soon come to a close. What the future of the company might look like without their longtime CEO. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back. The nationwide redistricting fight has made its way to Virginia today, where voters are weighing a referendum to allow the state to redraw the state's congressional map. This is what the map currently looks like on the left and what's proposed on the right. Currently, Democrats have the edge in 6 of the 11 districts, but if successful, they could have up to 10, and the map would remain in place until 2030. CBS News election law contributor David Becker joins me now. And David, I want to start off with a bit of sound from former Attorney General Eric Holder, who's been advocating on this issue. Let's take a listen.
We have to look at this in its totality. This is really a national fight. It's not a fight only about Virginia. And when the president told Governor Abbott in Texas, I needed 5 additional seats in the House of Representatives, there had to be a response to that.
Obviously, the former attorney general worked under former President Obama. But what is your assessment of Democrats saying that this is now a national fight rather than just Virginia?
Yeah, I can understand why they say that. I mean, we've got a situation where over the past decade plus, a lot of more Democratic-led states were trying to move away from partisan gerrymandering and adopted things like constitutional amendments and redistricting commissions. California was one of those states, of course. And they witnessed the president now attempt to pressure friendlier states like Texas to draw districts that appeared to favor Republicans. And I think what I've heard from Democrats is they viewed it as somewhat unilateral disarmament. And the only way to get both parties to the table is perhaps to have, essentially mutually assured destruction, that the blue states are going to redistrict for themselves, the red states are going to redistrict for themselves. And that, of course,
what kind of precedent does that set?
It's not a great precedent because in the middle are the voters and the election officials who have to manage this process, right? Voters have an expectation of who's running in their district, who the representative is. That person is supposed to represent their interests, but we're drawing the lines all over the place, starting with Texas, but in a lot of other states, to kind of confuse voters. And one thing that I think is really important is after all of these redistrictings, election officials have to do a ton of work to make sure that all of the voters are correctly coded for their proper congressional district. Now, that work is manageable if you can plan every 10 years to do it. But if we start getting to the point where we're doing it every 2 years, it's a real problem. And right now, election officials all over the country are preparing for the primaries and the general election in November. If this Virginia referendum passes, as it might be close, there will be litigation over it, of course, but we might see other states. Florida is talking about perhaps calling a special session and redistricting. Imagine if you're an election official in Georgia and you might not see a new plan until maybe May at the soonest, when you've got primaries coming up in August and November, and how that makes their work that much harder and how it really confuses the voters potentially.
And I was going to say to that end, how does gerrymandering like this impact the broader state of democracy in this country?
I mean, it's, we're both parties are trying to maximize their potential, in particular, for winning the House of Representatives. And the fact is, we're a very, very closely divided nation right now. And the control of the House might hang on just a couple of votes. It might not, but it might hang on a couple of votes. And that's why I think you see the president pressuring a state like Texas to try to redraw districts. And then a state like California seeking to respond with their referendum, which of course passed in 2025. It's not a great situation for the voters. Hopefully both parties will realize this doesn't benefit anyone. It doesn't benefit them. The voters are going to have their say this election. And it would be wonderful if both parties came to the table and tried to figure out a way to draw districts that were based on more what we would call traditional districting principles.
Well, we will see how this develops going forward. David Becker, thank you so much for being here. Earlier, I spoke to former Virginia Republican Governor and Senator George Allen. He's been outspoken against today's redistricting effort. Take a listen to our conversation. What are your chief objections to this initiative?
Well, Nicole, the chief objections to this scheme, this gerrymandering election rigging scheme, is that first of all, they're saying they want to restore fairness. The existing congressional districts are fair. And it's not just me saying this. There's a Princeton project, and Virginia's districts presently get a grade A. What they're trying to do is inveigle the people of Virginia to give up their rights to honest, fair, representative democracy. And they're taking people in rural communities, suburban communities, and lumping them in with densely populated, say, Northern Virginia. And to me, that's not representative democracy. It is rigging elections. Moreover, Nicole, a little over 5 years ago, I was on the road with folks trying to get a constitutional amendment through. And and then the people of Virginia, by a 2/3 margin, 66% said, we're sick and tired of these conniving politicians, self-dealing, creating districts. We want an independent bipartisan commission to draw districts. And those are the fair districts we have presently. I'm part of a group that's a bipartisan group called No Gerrymandering Virginia, and we're trying to get the truth, the honesty, the information to the people, and we're very much focused on independent voters and reasonable Democrats. And the reason this is so close is that there's a lot from polling, independent voters this year on this issue of redistricting or gerrymandering are saying no to this power grab by the Democrats.
Well, clearly there's been a lot of finger pointing and tit for tat in terms of which party is to blame here. But do Republicans share some blame in this, considering, at least in this cycle, this started with a Republican push to redistrict in Texas?
Good question. And from my perspective, the president was wrong, and the legislature of Texas and North Carolina, Missouri were also wrong to have this abnormal mid-decade redistricting or gerrymandering. Now, California did the same thing to offset Texas. And then you have Maryland across the river. It's rare that I'll say something good about Maryland, but the Democrats in Maryland said they're not going to gerrymander out the single Republican in their congressional district. I look at principles that leaders with integrity should try to unify people about positive ideas. And the Republicans in Indiana that had a big majority, they resisted President Trump's entreaties and encouragement and insults in a roundabout way to gerrymander Indiana. And so Indiana is an example of Republicans saying, no, we're not going to do it. Same with South Carolina, New Hampshire, and some other states. So there's half a dozen states that did the wrong thing. And I think half a dozen states that have decided to do the right thing. But in Virginia, it's different in that we have a constitutional amendment approved by the voters who said that gerrymandering or redistricting is to be done by an independent bipartisan commission. And so that's where Virginia's laws and constitution are different. And the reason that they're trying to do this power grab with a referendum is that to change the Constitution of Virginia, you need approval of the voters. And the voters, the people, are the owners of the government. And I'm hopeful that today, when it's all said and done, in the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence from the British monarchy, that Virginia, the cradle of American liberty, will say no to these outside interests that are trying to manipulate and deny the people of Virginia, millions and millions of them, fair, honest representation.
I spoke with Virginia Congresswoman Jen Kiggans this week, a Republican whose district, as you know, would be impacted by this new map. She told me that it's unfair, it's unconstitutional, and un-American. So I know you want this measure defeated, but if it does succeed, do you expect a legal challenge?
Yeah, we'll have a legal challenge. Let me just bring up Jen Kiggans. I'm glad you interviewed her. Abigail Spanberger, who had previously stated that gerrymandering was detrimental to democracy and that it takes away the voices of voters. Abigail Spanberger won Jen Kiggans' 2nd congressional district last year. She also won the 1st congressional district held by Republican Rob Whitman. And any political party, Republican or Democrat, that needs to cheat to rig election results to win must not have a whole lot of confidence in the popularity of their ideas or the quality of their candidates. In the event that this does get a yes vote, and it's going to be very narrow, the Supreme Court of Virginia is going to have to rule on this. And I think if our side wins, the court cases are moot, because there was a circuit court judge with 2 rulings in Tazewell County whose decision saying that what they've done in the way that the manner, the processes are unlawful and unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will have to rule on it, and the Supreme Court of Virginia should uphold the Constitution and laws of Virginia and strike it down. But we're not waiting for judges to make this decision, but there'll be a court case. There is a court case and a hearing on Thursday in the event that, there'll be a hearing, period. Now, hopefully it'll be moot, but if not, the fight will continue for the rights and prerogatives of the people of Virginia to have fair, honest, representative democracy.
Former Virginia Governor and U.S. Senator George Allen, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you, Nicole, and thank you for covering this important issue.
Coming up, former Google executive Hector Mujica joins me to discuss why he dropped out of his Senate race in Florida. The Democrat is now trying to flip a Republican House seat. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Former Google executive Hector Mujica was seeking to fill the Florida Senate seat left by Marco Rubio in this November special election, but the Democrat has since dropped out and declared his candidacy for the state's 28th congressional district. Hector Mujica joins us now, and thanks so much for being with us. I really want to start off with this news of day here in the resignation of your fellow South Floridian Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick. What are your thoughts on her decision to step down today?
Listen, I think it's definitely a serious situation. At the end of the day, accountability matters. And when there are credible allegations, especially those involving the misuse of public funds, people expect consequences. And I think stepping down was the right decision for the institution and for her constituents.
Turning to your own race now, tell us a little bit more about why you made this switch, not running for Senate, now running for the House, and what makes you confident that you can flip this seat since it's solidly Republican?
Yeah, listen, I made this decision because leadership requires honesty, and the reality is that Florida's 28th congressional district gives us a clear path to victory and a clearer path to actually delivering for the people of South Florida. This isn't a step back, this is a step towards impact. And right now, we are polling within the margin of error, which I think tells you a lot about the frustration that people are feeling in this congressional district. I think somewhere along the way, too many people started treating parts of Florida like they were not worth fighting for. And I reject that outright. This district is about 75% Hispanic, is deeply working class. It is focused on the basics, jobs, cost, safety, and opportunity. And right now, this campaign, this race against Carlos Jimenez is essentially a statistical tie. And that tells you that people are ready for change in this district.
And speaking of change, I want to talk to you about some of your domestic proposals. You have, for instance, suggested eliminating federal income taxes for households making under $150,000 a year. Last night on this program, we spoke to Georgia gubernatorial candidate Keisha Lance Bottoms, who proposed something similar for teachers. So are these types of proposals a direct response to the president's no tax on tips or overtime?
Listen, I think these type of proposals are a direct response to the frustration that people in Florida are feeling right now, and people around the country are feeling right now. In Florida, the average home price has jumped from about $250,000 before the pandemic to around $375,000 today. That tells you that right now people in Florida are feeling strained by the cost of living. People in Florida are feeling like they cannot keep up with the cost of healthcare, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries. And that's why my campaign is focused on three things: lowering costs, expanding opportunity, and restoring trust. Because right now, too many people are living one hit away from going under. And if you're living like that, that's not freedom, that's fragility. And I believe we need an economy with strong floors and no ceilings where families can count on the basics and still have a real shot at getting ahead.
I also want to turn to foreign policy. I know that you are a Venezuelan American, and I want to just get your thoughts on the U.S.'s capture of Nicolas Maduro a few months back. Do you think the Trump administration did the right thing?
Listen, I think we all have to have the discipline and the agility to hold multiple truths at once. And I very much believe that the capturing of Nicolas Maduro, the world is a better place. The hemisphere is a safer place without Nicolas Maduro at the helm of Venezuela. But you remove the head of the snake, but you left the poison, right? And we often talk about, hey, if you're cutting down a weed, but you're leaving the roots, that weed is going to grow right back. And this is something that's near and dear for me. This is really, really personal. I've seen what happens when democracy erodes, and we should be clear-eyed that the authoritarian regime in Venezuela and also in Cuba, they both have failed their people. But we also have to be smart. And what's happening right now is not quite a democratic transition. We took one dictator out, we replaced it with another dictator proxy, and we have left a lot of the same leadership that was in place for the Cartel de los Soles, for a lot of the narco state that we claimed was in place. That was the reasoning and the logic behind taking out Nicolas Maduro. Well, right now there's an extension of that same cartel running the country of Venezuela, and we need to keep up the pressure and moving in a direction of true democracy for the people of Venezuela.
All right, Hector Mujica joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Apple will have a new CEO for the first time in nearly 15 years. Up next, we'll look back at Tim Cook's legacy and where Apple's future could lead. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced his department is ending mandated flu shots for U.S. service members. In a video posted to social media, Hegseth called the previous requirement for yearly shots, quote, overly broad and not rational. The shift comes amid a broader change in administration policy towards vaccines, overhauling the childhood vaccine schedule and reducing universal recommendations for yearly COVID-19 and flu vaccines. Opening statements began today in Harvey Weinstein's rape retrial in New York City. This is the third time the case has gone before a jury. The disgraced movie producer was found guilty in 2020 of raping aspiring actress Jessica Mann in 2013. An appeals judge overturned his conviction in 2024 over improper testimony. A retrial last year failed to reach a verdict. Weinstein is already serving a 16-year sentence for a separate rape conviction in California. He has denied all allegations against him. Apple CEO Tim Cook will step down on September 1st after 15 years at the helm of the company. During his tenure, Cook helped quadruple the tech company's revenue and pushed Apple to become the first publicly traded company to be worth over $1 trillion. That was back in 2018. Today, it's valued at $4 trillion. Cook, who will become executive chairman of Apple, will be replaced by the current senior vice president of hardware engineering, John Ternus. CBS Sunday morning correspondent David Pogue joins me now. And David, talk to us a bit about the kind of leader that Tim Cook was and his legacy.
He was the opposite of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was colorful and volatile, an idea guy, a product guy. Tim Cook is calm, reserved. He does not lead by raising his voice. He's a genius with logistics, supply chain, nuts and bolts. I don't know how Jobs knew that this would be the right successor, but as you said, Cook has been a spectacular CEO, at least from a dollars and cents perspective. He's never been a product guy, though, but somehow Apple's done okay without another annual or semi-annual release of blockbuster new products.
And what do we know about his replacement, John Ternus?
Ternus is currently the senior vice president of hardware engineering. So I interviewed him for my book. He is also calm, reserved, not a showy person, but there's a difference. Ternus has been involved with every Apple hardware product since the iPad. So he has a little bit more of the Steve Jobs in him than Tim Cook did. He could be more of a product guy than Tim Cook.
Yeah, and speaking of that, how do you see the company's focus in particular potentially shifting when it comes to AI products under Ternus?
Yeah, AI has been a tricky spot for Apple. They've had some corporate turnover. They've had some changes in strategy. I think the central problem is that AI only sort of works. As you know, if you've ever asked for answers from ChatGPT or Google Gemini, 28% of the time it gives you a wrong answer. Apple is not a company that likes to ship products that kind of work. So it puts Apple in a tough position. Everybody's screaming, give us AI, give us AI. And Apple doesn't want to deliver something that's partly broken. We do know that in June, they will be unveiling their new AI-driven Siri, a Siri that knows, with perfect privacy, of course, all your emails, your text messages, and your files. So we'll be able to answer amazing questions like, what time do I need to leave to pick up my mom? And Siri knows that your mom's coming in for Thanksgiving, knows what flight she's on, knows what the traffic is, and just says 1:30. So June should be a big answer to that question.
You referenced this earlier that you have interviewed Tim Cook, who was handpicked by Steve Jobs as his successor, and he talked with you about Apple's values, how they've stayed with him from the early days of the company. Why did Cook think that that was important, and do you see that continuing without him in charge?
Oh, well, Cook could see what happened when Apple did not follow the old Steve Jobs policies, because there was a period of 11 years in there when Jobs was gone and the company almost disappeared. I mean, by 1996, Apple was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. And it was because Apple had turned into a more traditional technology company, more concerned with dollars and cents and profit margins and licensing and clones and selling off parts of it. Jobs came back in 97 and said, no, focus on the products, and the dollars themselves will take care of themselves. And so, yes, that will absolutely continue. If you think about it, Apple has a very small product line. They've focused down to a set of products that would fit on a boardroom table. Contrast that with, Sony or Samsung or another company with hundreds or thousands of products. And that's been the key to Apple maintaining the quality in the things that it does.
All right, David Pogwey, thank you so much for your reporting and your expertise tonight.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is reportedly pitching himself for a position within the Trump administration. I'll speak with our strategist panel about that and much more. You are watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer's resignation marks the third cabinet member to leave the Trump administration over the past 2 months. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was fired on March 5th. Pam Bondi was fired as Attorney General at the beginning of this month. Our political panel joins us now to discuss. That includes Republican strategist and former Romney presidential campaign advisor Kevin Sheridan, and Democratic strategist and co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Adam Green. Kevin, let's start with you. I mean, what do these departures tell you about the state of the Trump administration, and do you expect other Trump administration officials to follow?
Well, this one isn't as nearly as impactful or as important, I think, not to diminish that role, but as the AG and Homeland Security. Now, he's got to get those positions right, because what he's got with that is problems with independents and with his base. And people in the base were fed up with the way that things were going there. And he's going to have to bring in somebody that installs confidence with his base, because he's eroding both independents and some of his own people.
And Adam, I want to get your thoughts as well. On the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue, I think everything happens in threes, because now we have 3 members of Congress who have stepped down as well over alleged bad behavior. I mean, what do you make of this?
It's not great for our politics and trust in the system. We consistently see that the reason people are so mad is they have no faith in the political system or the economic system. Just pivoting back to the economic system for a second, this White House is what really runs labor and worker policy in this country, and they've dismantled rules to protect workers when they work overtime and other protections that were in place. This is like a casualty of war. Basically, the trend that we see between all 3 firings is folks who are not working fast enough to implement the Project 2025 agenda, which is radical, right-wing, and unfortunately what we probably will see is a more anti-labor Secretary of Labor.
Yeah, but, Kevin, in terms of Capitol Hill, though, do you think this is a reckoning that we're witnessing on the Hill? I mean, I don't know that I've
Seems to be a mini reckoning right now.
Yeah, gone in less than a week.
Yeah, it looks like a couple more. Maybe TMZ getting to town doesn't bode well for anybody that's been up to anything sketchy in the last couple of years. Look,
do you think the process has been?
It's both sides, though, and if we continue to see people go, so be it. Good riddance to anybody who's up to something no good.
In terms of the Trump administration, obviously someone who could potentially fill a vacancy we're hearing is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Axios is reporting, Mark Caputo, more specifically, who's a friend of the show, is reporting that the president is telling people that he is begging for a job. Do you think that's something the president will consider seriously?
Well, the latest report I saw, and I would endorse this fully, is for a Supreme Court opening, which is not open right now, but I think he'd make a great Supreme Court justice. But no, I doubt that he's technically big. I believe Mark Caputo that Trump told him that. I doubt, knowing that camp, that they're begging. But he's going to have to get beyond the Susie Wiles, any issues with her. It sounds like they golf. DeSantis and Trump golfed together the other weekend. So maybe they're putting bygones behind them, and there's going to be some sort of reckoning.
You want to weigh in here?
The first person I thought of when I saw this news was your old boss, Mitt Romney, who Donald Trump sat down with during the first administration to talk about Secretary of State. It was a completely fake conversation. He wanted to see Mitt Romney grovel to him, his former adversary. I think that's exactly what's happening here. If I had to bet, there's no big position in the future for Ron DeSantis, certainly not the Supreme Court.
You agree?
Well, he's an extremely capable person, a smart guy. I've been a great governor in Florida. If they can he also, he reconciles with people. Marco Rubio and him were famously on multiple debate stages that I watched going at it for weeks on end. And now they're, a great partnership. So Trump doesn't stay mad forever, and Republicans, come back together if it suits both of their interests.
Turning back to Capitol Hill, obviously we talked earlier in the show about the nomination hearing for Kevin Warsh, the president's nominee for Federal Reserve Chair. We know that North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis has vowed to withhold his support. Take a listen to what he told me right after the hearing.
Even if you think this is bogus and an unforced error on the part of the Trump administration, why hold that against Kevin Warsh?
Because it sets a precedent that lets somebody in the bowels of DOJ determine put pressure on somebody to get them to move out of this job instead of doing it at the current course and speed, and it was dumb.
So, Kevin, your thoughts here real quick. I mean, do you think that the senator is taking this stance here just because he's not running for re-election?
Yeah, Tom Tillis is going out guns blazing. No, he's had this position for weeks and months, and, this is going to be a real problem for them. I think they probably do work something out and drop the charges against him or the investigation against him because it's just too important to get Warsh in there.
What's your take on this? I mean, do you think he's someone who can be independent of the president if he is eventually confirmed? I'm talking about Kevin Warsh here.
Yeah, absolutely not. If you love the bombing of Iran and the subsequent increase in oil prices, you will absolutely love a non-independent Fed chair. These are both systemic things that the markets look at, and this will rattle the entire market. Like for years, we have had an entire world depend on America as economic leader and an independent Fed. And this is completely disrupting with that. You'd think that Donald Trump would learn his lesson with skyrocketing oil prices, but apparently he's going to double down.
Trump is highly sensitive to the markets, though, and he will tolerate a dip, but he's not going to do anything that's going to crash the economy. We've seen that over and over again. Both with tariffs and with the beginning of the Iran war, he adjusts so that the market goes back up, and we've seen that time and time again.
Quite high, and clearly he didn't go back from the brink. He bombed Iran, and oil prices went through the roof.
Once they get a deal, they'll go down.
Well, the entire world is now turned against us. The economy, how many trillions of dollars have been lost? And this would have an exact same unfortunate impact for the American people, and accidentally good impact, I guess, for Democrats, because, if you think Trump's popularity can go no further, just watch what happens with a non-independent Fed chair.
All right, a conversation that will continue. Thank you so much, Kevin Sheridan and Adam Green. And that does it for us here on The Takeout. I'm Nicole Killian. Major Garrett will be back tomorrow. The Daily Report is up next.